life sciences sector already operates in one of the most regulated industries in the world. The pace of technological advancement, including the emergence of new digital health products, is adding to this complexity and in some cases leading to some uncertainty regarding regulators' expectations and requirements. Regulators themselves are transforming their policies and requirements to keep up with digital change, not only in how they make approval decisions, but how they interact on a daily basis with stakeholders. How will regulation evolve to address the continued emergence of new technologies and digital capabilities? Could the role of regulatory change in the future? And how could this impact relationships with life sciences companies, other industry stakeholders, and patients? This is Tales of Transformation. Today, I have Doug McKinnell and Dan Ressler with me to discuss the regulation impact in life sciences digital transformation. Dan is the Global Regulatory Advisory Leader of Deloitte's Life Sciences and Healthcare practice, and Doug is a partner with Deloitte Northwest Europe and is based in Switzerland. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doug, let's start with you. How do you see the regulatory landscape evolving to keep up with the surge in digital innovation, especially with new products?
When I think about digital impact, I really think about it in a couple of different respects. The first is the very fast move that traditional pharma companies are making towards being data science and diagnostic companies, as well as new entrants, including the Silicon Valley giants, but also a great number of small and very interesting startups who are entering the digital health market in very new and interesting ways. From all of those, I see a huge willingness to disrupt the regulatory status quo. Those of us who have been very entrenched in pharmaceutical regulation for some time often forget that regulatory guidance is just one interpretation of the legislation. It's an interpretation that many of us for a long time have chosen to accept and adopt in the name of an easy life with known parameters and known processes and known procedures and likely outcomes. But we see that the new entrants in particular are looking at that and asking, why should I have to do this? There must be another way, and challenging some of those interpretations of the legislation, demanding new pathways and new ways of engaging with the authorities that are far more suitable for their very fast-moving, very agile aspirations in the way that they develop and serve digital health market with a life cycle that is just so much faster than the traditional R&D business of developing new molecules. I also spend quite a lot of time thinking about digital innovation as it applies to the traditional pharmaceutical business. And I think that's also poised for incredible disruption. We've spent years, going back at least 10 years, talking about the paradigm shift from managing regulatory through the basis of documents and instead managing through a data-centric world where application submissions for licenses are on the basis of data submissions, not kind of huge dossiers. We've also talked about things like controlled launch, where companies would give information very early to the authorities, and those authorities would reward that with limited marketing for that product to go onto the market, benefit from real-world evidence, and the quick expansion of that license to serve all other indications and the full patient population. But I think with the introduction of a lot of disruptive cognitive technologies, machine learning, automation, we're suddenly reaching tipping points where all of those things become far more tangible and far more real. And they're being adopted initially because they've got promise of driving the age-old aspirations for filing submissions faster, for doing so with higher quality, achieving submissions that have got a very high confidence level that they will be accepted first time, will go through a approval process in a streamlined fashion. And also something that's becoming a very real challenge for many of our clients is increasing their capacity, their throughput for completing both submissions of new therapies and also the variations and renewals against the existing portfolio. So the application kind of driving against those age-old demands, very much kind of ripe now for setting in place all the prerequisites of a real shift to data and a new relationship between farmer and the authorities.
Dan, what is your take given the work you're doing in the United States, as Doug has expressed from his position?
Well, I think Doug made some excellent points. I would add a couple of examples impacting the regulatory environment in SAMD, or software as a medical device, and real world evidence, and a lot of others. But if you just take those two, think about a world where algorithms become devices, and algorithms, software, may be diagnosing and at some point even treating disease. How do you develop that as a life sciences company? Maybe it will be developed by companies that aren't traditional life sciences companies either. And then how does that impact the regulatory environment? It's very different from a medicine that we can look at and understand how it is safe and effective, or a medical device that performs according to specification, accomplishes its goal, and is also safe. To understand something like software or something like an algorithm, that's a challenge for both the life sciences side, but also the regulators to try to understand, well, what is then a device, and when is it just some software that helps run something or make a decision or move a good or a service from point A to point B. So I think that's one example of an evolving regulatory concept that right now both sides, the regulator and the regulated, are trying to figure out. I mentioned real world evidence. That's a slightly different perspective. If you look at real world evidence versus the traditional, the gold standard, randomized clinical trial data, the good news is we now have, I think, increasing access to broader and broader data sets. And with more data, hopefully, comes more insights. But how does that real world, which could also be uncontrolled or determined as uncontrolled, how does that play into a highly regulated environment that likes the controlled portion of randomized clinical trials? I tend to think of that as an and, not an or. I think for the foreseeable future, there will be and continue to be a need for randomized clinical trial gold standard type trials, but also the opportunity to, maybe the right words, I don't know, enhance or supplement our knowledge the whole way from discovery through to activity in the market. All of these are digital, and they're all about different ways of processing information, and they're really changing the conversation amongst regulators and our life sciences clients, I think, every single day.
So, Dan, digital advancements can also offer opportunities for life sciences companies and regulatory agencies to improve many of the ways they work together. Where do you see the biggest impact?
I think digital advancement offers the opportunity to work better across several dimensions. And then, of course, you have to answer the question about how can you work better together. If you just think about a couple of dimensions for working better, you could probably talk about, not limited to, but the scientific dimension, the operational dimension, and for the regulators, their mission to ensure that we're bringing the best medicines and solutions to the public, also making sure that they're safe. And so if you think a little bit about maybe the science dimension first, to the extent that science is sort of both uncharted discovery, but then once you've got a potential asset, a potential medicine, a repetitive process of removing the unknown, I think digital brings a huge opportunity for data and information, both rich and very much at scale. I mentioned earlier our current data around randomized clinical trials. That's actually pretty sparse as far as data goes, as is arguably much of the information in the earlier phases. Now you're looking at genomics. You're looking at real-world evidence. You're looking at access to large longitudinal public health databases. And these are bringing, I think, new opportunities for discovery, and digital technologies like cognitive and artificial intelligence. They allow us now to both add to that, call it tome of knowledge, and to spot complex patterns and maybe matches, things that maybe just human researchers might miss. So if you kind of flip that and say, well, what about the regulators? I think regulators too benefit from those as they deliver on their mission, right? They want to ensure patients have access to the very best medicine and to protect the public health. And the broadest possible view of information, if you have the digital capabilities to unlock insights, should help with that. The question, of course, is can they work better together through transparency, and communication? I think the only other thing I'd say is we shouldn't lose sight of digital's benefits to sort of boring old operations. Doing the things we do now, but doing them much better and much more efficiently and connected all around the globe, that should drive down the cost of execution, which, of course, on the life sciences side, we invest in discovering new medicines. And on the regulators side, we reinvest in, really delivering on their mission.
So do you think both groups are prepared for the opportunity?
So are they prepared or are they ready? That's probably a more difficult question. I think regulators and life sciences companies are actually both pretty actively involved in the digital wave. I don't know of many of my life sciences clients who are sort of sitting around and waiting to see what happens. And I would say the same about at least the major regulators around the globe. And I think that's important to understand. But I would say that I think both the focus and the progress in the digital space, they're pretty unevenly distributed. So if you look at life sciences, I think you have some life sciences companies that are focused on the scientific opportunity. I think you have some that are saying, let's first focus on the operational excellence, the execution side. Maybe the majority of your assets are in a, quote, high community disease area. So you're using digital capabilities to do patient and family outreach. So it's a spread, and it's a spread across very different kinds of digital and the kinds of things that you're trying to accomplish. I think regulators likewise are stretched to both realize what could be a step function improvement in their ability to bring medicines to the public and ensure that they're safe, while also trying to figure out how do I just drive some more efficiency and some more speed. So to me, it's a little bit less about prepared, and it's more about, do they do both sides of this coin? Do they know how to marshal the right resources to accomplish what's most important? And do they agree on what's most important? Because I think right now you have both sides focusing very much on their own space that coordinate and communicate and work better. I think that's something that we've only started to see just the beginnings of. They kind of try to get their own houses in order.
Doug, if you were to look ahead 10 plus years, Dan talking about sort of this position of regulatory playing a different role and this balance of readiness and preparation, do you see regulatory playing a different role than it does today in advancement? And how do you see that collaboration with industry changing?
Most regulators have a very similar mission statement, is promote and protect public health. I don't see that mission statement being challenged by anything that evolves over the next 10 years. And some of the underlying principles also will remain largely intact. Regulatory exists, I think, as a vital framework of trust. It doesn't really bear thinking about how brave a patient would need to be to enroll themselves on a clinical study or to submit themselves to any kind of new therapy without knowing the kind of backbone of good practices and regulatory oversight that make that endeavor as safe and as known and as it possibly can be. I think what's really interesting is what is the right dimension or the right balance between promote and protect. Of course, regulators can be extremely conservative, extremely risk adverse with furthering the protection aspect of their mandate. So I think that will be one of the really interesting things to watch over the next 10 years is how that balance between promote and protect is managed. Will there be things around the adoption and evolution of things like genomics that are still in their infancy, where the authorities take a view that this is such a powerful force for good and leap forward in our ability to achieve better health outcomes, that they need to take a approach and a mindset that is far more weighted towards promote and an enabling infrastructure and an enabling mindset that says, go for it. This is a force for good. We'll work through challenges together, versus a more conservative, we're ready to be penal if you put a step out of line with a more protect-minded outlook. I think one of the other things is around the kind of evolution here is there's a whole ecosystem that the authorities need to change, that the industry needs to change, the entire supporting ecosystem of software vendors and other players need to all dance in lockstep around these evolutions. And that inevitably makes it complicated. I think certainly in Europe, there's a lot of people that still feel very burnt by the product information or PIM demise. That kind of met a slow, painful end in 2011, and still 8 years on, that's still etched in a number of people's memories that spent a lot of time, money, and energy pursuing something that ultimately didn't see the full light of day and didn't deliver on its promise as a regulatory initiative. So things like that, the kind of whole dance of the full ecosystem, all the different players in it, are no doubt a hindrance and a dragging influence on an evolution to a brighter, better way. But I think the contrast is also true. I think the great reason I have to believe is actually what Dan referred to as the boring old operational stuff. What we're seeing with great frequency now is the authorities and industry alike really trying to drive in cognitive machine learning, artificial intelligence into their operations today. In some cases, automating the age-old analog process. In some cases, using completely new tools to reimagine how to get the same outcome delivered. But in both cases, they're really making strides. And I think the natural conclusion of that is somewhat separately, the authorities applying these technologies and industry applying these technologies is going to deliver the energy and progress we need to make the greater leap towards international alignment, international cooperation, data-based view that adopts these new technologies and integrates them to the patient benefit.
Dan, given the knowledge that life sciences companies have of the regulatory environment, could this be a differentiator in defending against new digitally savvy entrants? Is that a fair assumption? And what opportunities do you see for life sciences companies?
I think the answer is maybe, or it depends. Yes, the knowledge of the regulatory environment can serve as a barrier to entry to folks that don't have it, or as a benefit, a defensive measure for companies that do. I would say, though, that there are disruptors playing or trying to enter right now, especially as we talked about things like software as a medical device or things like algorithms playing a part in healthcare. You know, pick your favorite big tech or pick one of the smaller tech located near them that sees an opportunity. And I think we've certainly seen the willingness of big tech to step in and to say, here's what we have and here's what we can provide. And maybe it's not quite as good as something in a hospital, but it's still pretty darn good. And create a groundswell of use or interest or opportunity in the public, with patients. And so while I think that regulatory defense or that regulatory ability to navigate will always be valuable, I do think that it's a little bit time will tell on how disruptors may influence the regulatory space and how patients themselves, whether they know they're doing it or not, will also help to influence regulators. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a mix, and I think it's something we're going to need to watch.
There is no shortage of opportunities that digital offers in life sciences. And it's exciting to hear how both industry and regulatory are evolving to support innovation. Dan and Doug, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
In our next episode of Tales of Transformation, we will continue this discussion with Dan Ressler and Doug McKinnell as we take a closer look at the evolving role of the patient and the influence consumers could have on the regulatory landscape.